Are you ready for phenomenal thought leadership from the most well-respected leaders in industry? Join us for stellar conversations and sound advice from trailblazers who have a passion for excellence. Learn best practices that will catapult the culture of your company into a new level of greatness. Welcome to Great Companies, Great Leaders. Your host is Christine Gannon.
Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Gannon. I'm your host of Great Companies, Great Leaders today. I'm also the founder and CEO of Brightworks Consulting. Just really excited to have Elizabeth Hart, Senior Vice President of Axon today. And we're going to spend some time talking about what's happening in the workplace, her role as SVP of People, Operations, and all things human resources and people at Axon. But before we do that, I wanted to acknowledge our sponsor today, Best Companies AZ, the top employer branding firm in Arizona and I know beyond. Denise and her team do an amazing job of helping organizations elevate their brand locally in their market. So Best Companies AZ, thank you for your sponsorship. So Elizabeth, thank you for being here. We've waited a long time to have you on. So excited to have you. I know our guests love hearing about the background and history of how our guests got to where they are today. Could you share a little bit about your career path and where you are today?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for inviting me here today. I'm thrilled to be part of this conversation. I have to tell you, I was a business major and pre-law, went to a smaller school in Virginia and came out of school and my mom was all about, you're going to become a lawyer, you're going to become a lawyer. And so I was pre-law, but I decided, after a few internships throughout my education, that law really wasn't for me. And so I walked into a recruiting firm in DC and they said, hey, come work for us. And ended up working for Robert Half for a few years and running kind of their legal team in Washington, DC. And then from there, kind of my career took off. Bloomberg pulled me out. They had a startup in Washington, DC called Bloomberg Government. And really my time in Bloomberg constantly was leaning in, raising my hand to take on more. And all of a sudden, I was leading a team in Asia for recruiting. I was tapped to be an HR business partner, which I hadn't been in Asia for our terminal sales. I ended up coming back to the States and was a chief of staff for one of our key leaders. And then a PE-backed firm tapped me and said, hey, come out to Arizona. Arizona was not on my list of places to live.
Oh, wow.
And build our HR from the ground up. And so worked for a tech startup here in Arizona. And then quickly Axon started connecting with me and the timing was never right. And eventually the timing did align and made the move. And I have no regrets. It's a great organization. I continue to learn and build my skills here.
So you've had quite the opportunity to learn and build skills over the last couple of years, but probably use all your expertise and skills more so, I would imagine. How do you think the impact of COVID in the workplace has affected your women population differently? How do you think that's been an impact for women?
Yeah, great question. I think, the data is, I'm a big data junkie. Enabling them to have access to mental health apps like Ginger, which provides 24/7 access to that. I think also personally, it changed my point of view, right? I constantly was always the individual that was working in the office and started to work from home as we all did, right? And kid on my lap at times. And,
Right.
Your priorities change. And you learned kind of throughout this period to really give yourself grace when needed. And I think it was just a big learning. It's been a big learning for a lot of employers. I think coming out of it, there's been a great, a lot of positive things too. I think, companies originally that maybe weren't as open to remote work now very much are. We're remote first where we can be. And so that has really helped us kind of bring in more diverse talent and target kind of cities where maybe diverse talent has a higher population, right? And we don't necessarily have an office. So I think, yes, there have been impacts kind of and people leaving the workforce diversity wise during the COVID period. But I think also companies have responded in a very great way, right? And it's opened the doors in a positive way for other things.
No, I agree. I'm thinking about organizations pre-pandemic that were not necessarily on board with remote working, right? I know IBM tried it and American Express was a big proponent of it. And then they would bring everyone back in the office. So it's kind of a seesaw. And then COVID hit and companies really did not have an option, if they were to stay afloat. And I think to your point, women did take the brunt in terms of managing, even with maybe a kid on your lap, like you said, managing the work environment, your job responsibilities, as well as what was happening at home. And so as we saw, the great resignation, most of them were women in terms of them just taking a step back, realizing, wow, there's something else for me to do. This is too much. But to your point, I think companies realize to create those pathways for women to come back, they really have to find some flexibility, right? There has to be some different options that potentially weren't on the table before. So staying in that vein, what do you think is the most pressing issue as we come out of, hopefully we're coming out of COVID. I never know if we are or we're not, but hopefully we are. And things are opening up and we look a little bit different, both, in our personal life and what we can access as well as professionally. What's your most pressing issue?
Yeah, I would say, we are growing at a really fast pace, our organization as a whole. And so we hope to land over 1,200 employees this year alone. That coupled with the great resignation, right? It's a candidate's market. It's still very much a candidate's market, even with everything going on around the globe. And, some employers have slowed down. We have not. I think when something happens, whether it's societal or not, we're the type of company that's constantly coming in, thinking about like, hey, how can we be supporting kind of those in Ukraine? Or, hey, how can we help drive change in society? Our mission is to make the bullet obsolete, to protect life, to protect truth, to accelerate justice, right? So for us now more than ever, it's full speed ahead. And so attracting all of that talent, even though you've got this war on talent going on, as well as retaining it. So you can go and you can land great talent all day, but you better believe, that we're retaining it. And the tricky thing about retention right now is that engagement, right? So a lot of us still are remote. How do you ensure that you've got a population where your talent is truly engaged, right? And it's not just back-to-back Zooms. And how are you layering in your culture in this remote setting? That has really been key to us. We end up doing things from, Kahoots, which is like trivia games, to Ask Me Anythings with our C-team leaders. No questions are off the table. To you can find our CEO doing Fortnite with people late night, right? But you've got to find ways that where we used to be interacting in person and building relationships and connecting and things of that nature, you have to find other ways to build that culture, even in a remote workplace.
I love that. I've seen companies do similar things in terms of having virtual potlucks and virtual, lunch and learns, and people are getting very creative, right? But I think it's a challenge to build culture remotely. And so companies are figuring out new ways to do that.
Yeah, that's completely right.
So you touched on it a little bit in terms of the impact on women and their mental health. What are some ways that your organization is supporting women? You mentioned a couple things, but what are some ways that, really intentionally Axon is looking at mental health for women?
Yeah, so I did mention kind of Ginger, that 24/7 support. We also, which is an app, but then we also do counseling, all of our employees and one loved one. Doesn't matter if it's, a partner or a dependent, it's classified as a loved one. get 12 counseling sessions as well. And I think that's for free. And I think that's really, really critical now more than ever. In addition, I think, we had a great panel discussion with some of our board members yesterday. And one of them said something that really resonates with me and something that I do all of the time, just learning to look, work-life balance. I feel like it's almost a myth, right?
Right.
In life, I would advise people pick what are the 2 or 3 things you're going to make a priority now in your life, and give yourself grace on the things that aren't those priorities. You can't be perfect at everything all of the time. And so if they don't fall into those 2 top priorities, right, that maybe you're going to fall a little short of perfection, and that's okay, right? And I think hearing that message, not just from me, but from other senior female leaders is really, really important. And understanding that, none of us are perfect, right? And those priorities are going to change based upon where you are in your life, what's going on, what role you have, et cetera.
Absolutely. Work-life integration, right? Instead of work-life balance, we're trying to figure out a way to integrate all of it in terms of, how we view work and the future of work and where we work and how we work. And I do think ensuring that women, we're more than half the population, typically more than half the workforce, although I don't know that that's true right now. We need to ensure that they're okay too, in terms of that they have what they need to be successful in this environment that we find ourselves in. So a quick pivot. Why do you think now is more than ever is it important to diversify your workforce?
Yeah, I mean, diversity breeds innovation, right? And a company like us that's very, very focused on driving societal change, we need diversity. We need that to build, to breed that innovation in-house and to solve some of society's biggest challenges at the end of the day. And as I mentioned earlier, now more than ever, this is a great time to be double downing on kind of diversity goals. We call them JEDI goals, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion goals, because we can hire that remote workforce, right? And so that has been a great focus area for us now more than ever.
What kind of that you can share? What kind of diversification approaches have you noticed in your career or that you're using today that might be helpful to others listening?
Yeah, I would say that if you want to drive change, I would first start off with understanding, looking at the data. Where are you today? Where are your holes? Where are your gaps? But then it's not just a you thing. It can't just be one individual, one leader, one head of diversity and inclusion, equity and inclusion. It's got to be a whole team. It's got to be the whole organization that's moving forward, right? And has ownership in driving change. So I really think that some organizations say, hey, we hired a director of DEI and things are going to change. And that's not the case. Everyone has a part to play at the end of the day, and really making sure that everyone understands kind of what their part is. Then you set goals, right? And you start moving the needle. And I think the biggest thing is kind of the accountability on the backside. What happens if change doesn't come about, right? And there's got to be some sort of accountability. A few years back, I was at Bloomberg, and we were a specific group of Bloomberg Government, and we really wanted to drive more diversity throughout that group. And so we actually took an approach where we did do blind resumes, and it worked. Within a year, we had substantially changed kind of what our population looked like. Now, we had the benefit that we were hiring like mad, right? But we made it a priority, and we did a ton of education, and we put ownership down on recruiting and hiring managers, et cetera. And the outcome, was that we truly did drive change at the end of the day. So again, I think it's you have to remember it's not a one woman or one man shop that can drive this change. It's probably not going to happen overnight, but if you've got a team, you can definitely drive alignment.
I love everything you said. It's intentional, right? There's intentionality behind the strategy. And while there may be an office or a person responsible to drive that strategy, embedding DE&I into the DNA of the company takes everyone. It has to start from the top, but it takes everyone for it to really transform the culture. It really does. It takes everyone.
Right. Because you can land that talent all day long, but then they have to stay. Right.
And yes.
So
and
it's creating
really that environment for them to want to stay.
That's right. That's right. And that's everyone's job.
Absolutely. So as we wind up, last question for you. Actually, two. What advice do you have for leaders who want more gender equity?
A, make it a priority. Mm-hmm. B, I would say, start the hard dialogue. It can't just be you. So sometimes that means, going to your leaders and saying, hey, what are we going to do? Right. And 3, I would say kind of holding people accountable at the end of the day. The 4th thing is just understanding you can want the equity kind of all day long, but and also understanding it does take time, right? Change doesn't happen overnight. But you can drive those conversations today, get a plan in place, and start taking action. Absolutely. No, I think everything you've shared will be super helpful for those listening. We're all finding our way and navigating in this environment, how we can do better, be better, differently in the workplace, and ensure that there's intentionality behind it. So your hero growing up, who is your hero? This is going to sound corny, but my mom. Oh, that's not corny. We love moms. That's awesome. My mom was my biggest fan, my biggest cheerleader. She probably pushed me harder than anyone else did in life. I grew up competing on a national level and riding horses. And every day that I wasn't in school, you better believe I was out training and studying my videos. And, but she definitely has made me who I am today. And, I know during childhood, there were times where I probably didn't have great things to say. Right. But looking back on it, I think you get older and you just appreciate tenfold what your parents did for you. So definitely my mom. Way to go. Well, I'm sure she's incredibly proud of you. I'm incredibly grateful that you had made the time to come on today. Thank you for sharing your insights, your wisdom, perspective, point of view was tremendous. Really appreciate it, Elizabeth. Thank you. Thank you. Have a good day.
Brightworks Consulting hosts this podcast and YouTube channel to spotlight the leadership around the world that is changing lives. Brightworks offers a myriad of consulting services in the public and private sector, to include diversity, equity, and inclusion solutions for any size company. You can find us at www.brightworksconsulting.com. We're honored to have Best Companies AZ as a presenting sponsor for this podcast. Best Companies AZ is your #1 source for regional employer branding. You can find them at www.bestcompaniesaz.com.